The morning he realized I was gone, he called me 11 times before 7 a.m. I know because I was sitting in a window booth at a diner off I-90, watching the snow come down over the parking lot, my phone face up on the table, his name lighting up the screen over and over. I didn't answer. I'm Robert a second cup of coffee and watched a truck driver scrape ice off his windshield in the gray early light, and I thought, this is the first morning in 6 years that I don't have to wonder what mood he's going to be in when he wakes up. I should back up. His name was Forrest. We met when I was 26 and he was 32 at a work event I almost didn't go to. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming when they've had years of practice. The kind of charm that makes you feel chosen, singled out, like you're the only person in the room worth talking to. I was flattered. I was also, looking back, tired in the specific way that comes from spending too long trying to prove yourself in a field that doesn't take you seriously yet. I was a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized firm in Chicago. I was good at my job. I knew I was good at my job. But there's a difference between knowing something and feeling it, and Forrest made me feel it in a way my career hadn't yet managed to. We dated for a year and a half. He proposed on a Saturday morning in our kitchen. No fanfare, no ring box hidden in a dessert. Just him standing by the coffee maker in his socks, saying he couldn't imagine doing any of this with anyone else. I said yes, I meant it. We got married in September in a small ceremony outside Milwaukee where my parents live. Forrest's family flew in from Atlanta. His mother hugged me at the reception and said I was exactly what she'd hoped for him. And I believed her, and I thought, this is it. This is what all the hard years were building toward. The first year was good. The second year was fine. By the third year, I had started to notice things I didn't have a name for yet. Forrest had an opinion about everything I did, but he delivered those opinions sideways in a way that made them hard to push back on. If I mentioned a project I was proud of at work, he'd listen, then say something like, "That's great, babe. I just wonder if your director actually values that kind of initiative, or if he's the type who prefers things done a certain way." He never said I was wrong. He just introduced doubt, quietly, the way you'd introduce a draft into a warm room. You don't notice it at first. You just gradually get cold. I started second-guessing my instincts at work. I started apologizing more. I started framing my accomplishments as luck and my failures as character. I didn't realize what was happening until my friend Cecily, my oldest friend, someone who's known me since third grade, sat me down at her kitchen table one evening and said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually hear it." She asked me when I had last made a decision without checking with Forrest first. Not a major decision, any decision. I couldn't answer her. That was 18 months before the night everything changed. During those 18 months, I did something that I now understand was both a survival instinct and a form of preparation, even if I didn't recognize it as such at the time. I started paying attention to our finances with a focus I hadn't applied since before we got married. Not because I was planning anything, at least not consciously, but because numbers have always been the place where I feel most like myself. Clear, logical, honest. What I found, slowly, over months of quiet attention, was that Forrest had a version of our financial life in his head that was different from the one that actually existed. He talked about our money the way he talked about everything else in our life, with confidence, with authority, in a way that made you feel like he must know more than you. But he didn't. He had no idea how much was in our investment accounts. He didn't know our mortgage rate. He didn't know that the bulk of the down payment on our condo, $42,000, had come from my grandmother's estate, which I had inherited 2 years before we bought the place. I knew all of these things. I'd always known them. I had just, somewhere along the way, stopped saying them out loud. I also reopened my individual accounts, moved my direct deposit, and quietly began rebuilding the financial independence I had let slide during the years of our marriage. I wasn't hiding anything. I was just remembering who I was before I started editing myself for someone else's comfort. It was a Wednesday in November when he came home late. I had texted him twice that afternoon, once to ask if he wanted me to pick up dinner, once to check in because he hadn't responded to the first message. Neither text was answered. I made pasta, ate alone. cleaned up, and was sitting at the kitchen island going over a quarterly report on my laptop when I heard his key in the lock at 11:15. He came in without taking off his coat. He set his keys on the counter. Not placed, set. That specific careless drop that meant he wanted me to notice something. And then he leaned against the doorframe between the entryway and the kitchen and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as deliberate. "I need to tell you something," he said. I closed my laptop. I looked at him. "I've been seeing someone." He said it the way you'd report the weather. "Someone from the office. It's been going on for a few months. I thought you should know." I didn't say anything. He kept going. "I'm not ending it. I want to be honest with you about that. I think we've been in a bad place for a while, and I think this is part of why, but I'm not going to pretend it's not happening." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator made its usual low hum. I remember noticing that. "You're not going to say anything," he said. "What would you like me to say?" He blinked. He had expected something. Anger, tears, the kind of scene that would have let him position himself as the reasonable one. He hadn't expected me to sound like I was conducting a performance review. "I don't know," he said. "A reaction would be nice." "I'm processing," I said. He stood there for another moment, then said he was going to sleep in the guest room and walked down the hallway. I heard the door close. I sat at the kitchen island for a long time, not moving, not crying, just very still. Then I opened my laptop again and began to work. I want to be honest about what that night was actually like, because in the version of this story that gets told after the fact, there's usually a clear moment of strength, a decision, a pivot, a line in the sand. The truth is messier than that. I sat at that island and I went through about 6 different emotional states in the space of an hour. I felt humiliated. I felt vindicated in a way that made me feel worse, not better, because it meant I'd been right to feel uneasy for 2 years and I hadn't trusted myself enough to act on it. I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, and somewhere underneath all of that, very quiet, very calm, was something that felt almost like relief. Not because I wanted my marriage to be over, but because I had just been handed clarity, and clarity, even the painful kind, is so much easier to work with than fog. I didn't go to sleep that night. At midnight, I called Cecily. She answered on the second ring because she's the kind of friend who answers on the second ring, no matter what time it is. I told her what had happened. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just asked, "What do you need right now?" And I told her. I told her exactly what I needed, and she said, "Okay, I'll be ready." By 2 in the morning, I had sent an email to a family law attorney I'd researched 3 months earlier, during one of those late nights when the unease had gotten loud enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had found her through a colleague who'd gone through a divorce the previous year. Her name was on a list in my notes app with a star next to it, which tells you something about the state of mind I'd been in without fully admitting it to myself. By 3, I had begun the quiet work of organizing everything I would need: account statements, records of the down payment and its source, documentation of what I had contributed to our household over 6 years. Not angry work, methodical work, the kind I'm good at. I was done before 5. I took a shower, I made coffee, I packed one bag with what I needed for the next few weeks, practical things, the things that actually matter, and I sat at the kitchen island one last time with my coffee and looked at the condo we had lived in for 4 years. The art on the walls, which we had chosen together. The rug I had bought from a woman in Wicker Park who made them by hand. The small things that accumulate in a shared life and eventually start to feel like evidence of something. I left him a note. Not a long one, just 3 sentences. "I'm everything you said last night. I've spoken to an attorney. The paperwork will come to your office." I left the note on the kitchen counter next to his keys. Then I picked up my bag and I walked out, pulling the door shut quietly behind me so I wouldn't wake him. I drove to Cecily's apartment on the north side. She had made up her guest room and left a key under the mat, and when I let myself in, she was already awake, sitting at her kitchen table with 2 cups of tea, and she looked at me and said, "You okay?" And I said, "I think so." And she said, "Good." And that was it. We didn't need to do more than that. He started calling at 6:50 that morning. I know because Cecily and I were still at her kitchen table when my phone started going. The first call I let ring. The second. By the fourth, she looked at me and raised her eyebrows, and I shook my head. By the seventh call, which came in at 7:22, Cecily got up and refilled our tea without comment, and I appreciated her for that. He left a voicemail after the eighth call. I listened to it later, alone. His voice had a quality I had never heard in it before. Not quite panic, but close to it. That sound a person makes when the floor has dropped out and they're realizing, for the first time, that they were standing on something they didn't build and don't own. I don't understand what's happening. You need to come home. We need to talk about this. You can't do this. Call me back. Please call me back. I didn't call him back. I forwarded the voicemail to my attorney. 2 days after I left, I called my company's HR department and reported what had happened between him and a colleague whose conduct I had some concern about. Carefully, factually, with specific dates and what I knew directly. I want to be clear. I didn't do this out of anger. I did it because I worked in the same industry, because his workplace conduct had professional implications, and because I had asked myself very honestly whether I was doing it for the right reasons. I decided I was. I made the call. I don't regret it. His company opened an internal inquiry. I don't know the full outcome. I know that 6 weeks later he was no longer in the same role. My attorney filed the divorce petition on a Thursday. Because the down payment on the condo was documented as coming from my separate inheritance, we had never legally commingled it. Something I had been careful about, almost unconsciously. It was treated as separate property. The condo itself, which we jointly owned, was appraised and the equity divided. It was not a simple process. Nothing about divorce is simple, and I won't pretend it was. There were difficult months. There were days I sat in Cecily's guest room and stared at the ceiling and felt the specific grief of losing something you had loved, even if that thing had stopped being good for you. But the process was fair. My attorney was thorough, and because I had done the quiet work of understanding exactly where I stood, I was never in the dark about what I was entitled to. Forrest contested some of it, in the way people contest things when they're angry and not thinking clearly. His attorney eventually talked him out of the positions that had no legal footing. By late spring, we had a settlement. I found an apartment in Lincoln Square that spring, a 2-bedroom with south-facing windows and original hardwood floors that creak in a way I have come to find genuinely comforting, like the apartment is just doing its job. I bought a rug from the same woman in Wicker Park. I'm Robertsing on my house in Clare, 67 years old, and Pumatschies. Then I'd chosen things together. Cecily came over the first Saturday I was there, and we ordered pizza and sat on the floor because I didn't have furniture yet, and she said, "This feels like yours," and I said, "It does," and I meant it completely. I want to say something about the silence. The thing people don't tell you about this kind of marriage, the kind where the damage is subtle, where no one raises their voice, where the erosion happens so slowly you don't notice the ground giving way beneath you, is that one of the hardest parts of leaving is learning to trust your own mind again. For years I had been trained, without quite knowing it, to introduce a question mark at the end of every conviction I had, to doubt what I saw, to apologize for taking up space. It takes time to unlearn that. I won't pretend I'm completely done with the process, but there's a moment I keep coming back to, a moment I think about when things get hard, which is this. The morning I sat in that diner booth off I-90, watching the snow, his name lighting up my phone, over and over, and not answering, and drinking my coffee, and feeling beneath everything that something had been returned to me that I had not realized was missing. Myself, mostly. The version of me that made decisions and trusted them. The version that didn't check a temperature in the room before speaking. The version that knew exactly what she'd built and what she was owed. Forrest got the furniture. He got the kitchen table we'd bought together. At a place in Andersonville. The couch, the lamps. I didn't want any of it. I wanted a clean start and a clean table and windows that faced south. He sent me an email about 2 months after the settlement, asking if we could talk. Not about anything legal. Just talk. I read it, thought about it for a day and a half, and then wrote back. I don't think that would be helpful for either of us. I hope you're well. I meant the last part, not warmly, but honestly. I no longer had any interest in his suffering and no particular investment in his success. He was just someone I used to know. which is the truest thing you can say about the end of a marriage. I'm 31 now. I have my apartment with its creaky floors and my job, which I am good at and have stopped apologizing for being good at. I have Cecily, who answers on the second ring. I have a group of friends I had quietly let drift during the years I was busy managing Forrest's perception of the world, who came back when I reached out, who said in various ways that they'd been waiting. I have a notes app on my phone that no longer has an attorney's name starred in it, and I noticed that absence the way you noticed the absence of a sound you'd gotten used to, the refrigerator hum, the low-grade tension of a life lived under someone else's assessment of your worth. I have mornings now that are just mornings, coffee and work, and the sound of traffic on the street below and no one's mood to calibrate to. People ask me sometimes, friends, and once a woman at a dinner party who had heard some version of the story and wanted to know what I would tell someone in the situation I was in, the quiet kind of bad marriage, the one without obvious evidence, without a dramatic scene, without a moment you can point to and say, there, that's when it became wrong. I tell them, trust what you're measuring. I was an analyst. I had been measuring the shape of my own unhappiness for years. I knew the numbers. I'm Robert Sinclair, 67 years old, and I'm Robert Sinclair, 67 years old, and the night he told me what he'd done, the night he stood in the kitchen in his coat and delivered it like a weather report, that was the moment I stopped waiting. Not because he had finally given me permission, but because he had finally shown me clearly what I had already known, and knowing without doubt is a different thing from knowing with a question mark attached. Some things don't require a second opinion. Some decisions you make quietly, in the middle of the night, at a kitchen island, with a laptop and a cup of coffee and 6 years of careful attention. And then you leave a note, and you walk out, and you let the door close behind you without making a sound. That's all it took, and that was enough. There's a version of this story where I scream, where I throw something or cry on the floor or beg him to explain himself. I used to think that version would have felt more honest, more proportionate to what had actually happened. But when I look back now, I don't think the silence was weakness. I think it was the first genuinely clear-headed thing I had done in years. What Forrest didn't understand, what I don't think he was capable of understanding, is that outcomes follow choices the way water follows gravity. Not because the universe is keeping score, not because some force is balancing the ledger, but because the choices we make shape the conditions we end up living inside. He chose, over and over, to treat our marriage as something he could afford to be careless with. He chose to prioritize how he looked over what was actually true. And eventually, those choices produced a life in which the person he had underestimated had quietly, carefully prepared to leave it. I think about the version of myself from 3 years into that marriage, the one who had started apologizing for her own instincts, who double-checked her own judgment before acting on it, who had somewhere along the way confused keeping the peace with being good. That version of me wasn't weak. She was just operating without something she needed, the willingness to trust what she actually knew. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the night he told me. Not the note I left, or the calls I didn't answer, or the diner booze off I-90 with the coffee and the snow. The thing I keep coming back to is the 18 months before all of that, when I quietly reopened my accounts, rebuilt what I had let erode, and started paying attention again with the part of my brain I had always trusted most. That wasn't revenge. That wasn't even a plan. It was just a woman remembering what she was capable of and deciding to act like it. I think that's what integrity actually looks like most of the time. Not a grand declaration, not a dramatic confrontation, just a long series of private choices to remain honest with yourself even when it would be easier not to be, to look at what the numbers are actually saying, to not invent a more comfortable version of the truth, and the willingness to act on what you know even when acting on it is frightening. That's something else entirely. That's what gets you out the door at 5 in the morning with one bag and a note on the counter. Not rage, not certainty that everything will be fine, just the decision that you will not stay in a version of your life that requires you to be less than you are. Cecily answered on the second ring. My attorney had a starred note in my phone. The paperwork was organized before sunrise. None of that happened by accident. It happened because I'd been building toward it, quietly, for longer than I'd admitted to myself. not out of anger, but out of a refusal to stop paying attention. That refusal is available to anyone. It doesn't require a particular kind of strength or a particular kind of life. It just requires the decision, made again and again, to keep looking clearly at what's actually in front of you, and then, when the moment comes, to act like someone who knows exactly what she's worth.